everyone, my name is Olivia Noorenberghe and I am a sales agronomist with Pride Seeds. And so I'm reporting to you from the field. I wanted to talk about a pest, the billion-dollar pest as they call it, corn rootworm. So this pest, it's prevalent in the soils in corn-on-corn rotations, kind of in that May to June timeframe. So up until this point, they are feeding on, corn roots, and then they will eventually pupate and become adult beetles into that kind of July timeframe. So kind of that stage right now that we're at right here. The concern with those larvae feeding on the roots is that sometimes what happens is there's such extreme feeding that it can actually, prune those roots. And then when we get, extreme weather, such as some of the windstorms that we've had kind of recently, that plant can actually fall over because the roots aren't able to anchor it to the soil. And so then what we see is kind of goosenecking. So the corn plant looks like it's fallen over and then it's kind of trying to grow up to the sun again and continue its growth there. So that can be a concern. Another reason why we are concerned with corn rootworm is, with them kind of clipping those roots, plants aren't maybe able to get the water that they're needing or the nutrients as well. So that can be a concern. What we do kind of this time frame, it's the middle of July to end of July, is we're putting out sticky traps to kind of get an idea of what the beetle populations are. And so we'll check these every week and we will count how many beetles there are in a trap. And so what we're looking at is the threshold is about 2 beetles per trap per day. And so we're just using these to get an idea of what populations are in the field and whether farmers could maybe be concerned. Those beetles will sometimes feed on silks as well, which can, impede pollination. But I would say that the majority of the feeding is done kind of below ground in that May to June timeframe. What can we do to kind of combat these beetles if we know that we do have some high beetle populations or we've had history of some lodging in the field and we've seen corn rootworm before? We can, use, obviously rotation is key. So if we can rotate to anything besides corn, that will help. Ideally, if we can do it for, at least 2 years, that would be the most ideal. But I know that in some situations where there is livestock, that can be difficult when you're relying on corn as a feed source. The other thing is traits. So we need to make sure that we're selecting hybrids that have protection against corn rootworm. So those would be your traits that have below ground protection. That could be your smart stacks or what we call our G8. And then we also have our G9, which would be Smart Stacks Pro. So that has a new mode of action with RNAi. And so that'll give you kind of an additional protection against corn rootworm, especially in some of those areas where we've started to see resistance starting to build. That might be a nice tool. And then the other one that we have is our VT4 Pro, or what we call our G6. And that just has that one mode of action with the RNAi kind of below ground as well. So something to keep in mind, but I would say right now, get out in your fields, make sure we're looking. It's typically around this time frame or when we're spraying, a fungicide at tassel that I usually get those calls about some goosenecking and lodging. So get out in your fields and scout. One thing that I think is great is, if you don't know if there's corn rootworm or you can't see the larvae because they are pretty small, I usually will dig up some roots and put them in some water. And what happens is the larvae actually will float to the top. So there'll be little white worms floating on the top. So that's one way that you can see whether you have them. But obviously digging the roots, washing them and seeing if there is feeding on them. And then also putting those sticky traps out in the field to get an idea of what beetle populations there might be and what we should maybe consider for next year if we do have that high pressure. So that's all I have for you now. Make sure you're out in those fields scouting. And if you have any questions, feel free to let us know.
Stay connected with Pride Seeds all season long for the latest agronomy insights and real-time updates from the field.